In the wake of a pivotal federal election, markets opened with cautious optimism. But what does political change really mean for investors? With Prime Minister Mark Carney now at the helm, questions are swirling about the future of Canada's economy, entrepreneurship, and its place in a volatile global market. Meanwhile, across the border, a new investment narrative is gaining traction, the so-called Sell America trade. I'm now joined by Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Ltd, to cut through the noise and get a clearer picture of where markets stand, what investors should focus on, and how to navigate uncertainty with confidence. Brendan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Theresa. That's a high bar because there's an awful lot of noise. So we'll do our best.
Now, yesterday we headed to the polls, but did today's stock markets really care who won in last night's election?
No, not really, because we don't even know quite who won. We're not even sure whether it's going to be a Liberal minority or majority. Some news outlets saying today that the out-of-state returns, so to speak, the overseas returns, the advanced polls, may actually push Prime Minister Carney over the top for his majority. So, no, I don't think the markets really deeply and profoundly care. But that's not specific to Canada or elections in specific. All political events are some fun to talk about, but they really don't affect markets to too great a degree, at least not for very long. So if all of a sudden Alberta were to secede in the wake of this election, the way some people feel it might, or that the U.S. South did at the when Abraham Lincoln was elected. Not to compare Mr. Carney with Mr. Lincoln, but if there was something major happen like that, the market would react. But this is in line with the range of what the market and observers generally had expected.
Now, we've had no economic growth in Canada. So what does Prime Minister Mark Carney have to do in order to support Canada's entrepreneurial future?
I'm not sure we've had no economic growth. It's just that we haven't had nearly as much as the large majority of other developing countries, the so-called OECD countries, and certainly less growth than we've seen in the United States. Well, I mean, what Mr. Carney will do depends which version of Mr. Carney. If it's the values writing, memoir writing Mr. Carney, then maybe one set of things. If it was the promises he made on the election, or the intent that he'd stated on the election to get pro-growth again and to build pipelines, that may be a different thing. I think, though, the more fundamental answer is not what government needs to do or doesn't need to do. I think it is more that government doesn't need to be the answer to every question or every problem. It does need to at least provide an environment where people can figure out the solutions and do its best to ease roadblocks toward getting economic growth done, because governments don't actually grow the economy. The money that the government spend has to come from somewhere. Ultimately is either printed, which is very inflationary, or it comes from the private sector. So short of printing money and creating inflation, the money needs to come from growth that comes from outside the government sector. So I think the answer to the question is do things that make it easier for the private sectors to succeed and to thrive.
And would a majority government have been better for business in Canada? And if so, why?
Hard to say. And again, it may be, I think the odds are less than 50-50, but there's a greater than zero possibility it still may come out of majority government either straight away, or I wouldn't put it past a few members of some fringe parties, which now basically is everything but the Liberals. The Conservatives are now fringe parties, crossing the floor in exchange for, say, a cabinet seat to become part of the Liberals and push them over majority territory. So one way or another, it wouldn't be impossible for the Liberals to get a majority, but such a strong majority, such a strong plurality is really no different than what we've seen. Between the Liberals and the NDP, there is a majority of the votes. So it was looking at one point last night whether, like, if to govern, the Liberals might have to do a deal with the separatist Bloc Québécois, but that doesn't seem to be the case now. So really, it's kind of the status quo. The economic thought process behind the Trudeau government now is the Prime Minister, and then partnering with the NDP that gives you your majority. So it's the same it was 2 days ago or 2 years ago.
And do you think that that government, that liberal government that now is Mark Carney is the face of, do you think that that's good for businesses?
I think it'll be better than people expect. I think a lot of the downtown business people here, certainly in Calgary and across the country, were very much pulling for what was perceived to be a more pro-business conservative government. That having been said, Pierre Poilievre, he of no current seat in the House of Commons, was very clear that he had no real interest in talking to business. He had interest in talking to people, as though businesses were run by something other than people, which they aren't quite yet. AI is not at that stage. So it has been historically that liberal governments have actually been very good for business. Talking with one of my large clients in the construction business just today, and I said, "Well, is this a good thing or a bad thing?" He said, "Well, liberals tend to be better for my business because they spend more money." So, notwithstanding what I said a little while ago about the growth needing to come from the private sector, it may well be that this liberal government is better than business had anticipated it would be.
And what are your take home lessons from our Canadian election and your take home from your clients?
Well, I think for a country, a corporation, or an individual, focusing on another person and saying they're the problem, they're what's wrong, is a mistake. I think Canada going forward, it's not about what to do about President Trump. Do nothing about President Trump. As we can see, the United States isn't thinking about us at all. And as the clip showed just at the beginning of this segment, the approval ratings for the president are imploding. We never had to do anything. We never had to fight his tariffs because they were so inconsistent and wildly at odds with what was practical. He would get himself in the end. So too, as a country, we really need to just focus on what we can do. We're talking about international trade, interprovincial trade. That has to be cleared up. Services and goods need to be able to flow across borders much more easily between province to province. We need to make it easier for people to not only start businesses, but grow businesses. So whether you're a person or a country, blaming somebody else for your problems will not solve those problems because the root cause is never external or virtually never external. Donald Trump would never have had the temerity to say the things he did about Canada if he didn't realize we didn't have our own house in order. So to the extent that Canada can work together and actually realize the dream of a unified nation, Mr. Carney talks about being humble. If he has the humility to be able to bring the 40 or 50 odd percent of the people who didn't vote for him on board, I think we can make something of this country.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Theresa.